In this video, we'll review the cases of death row inmates who, after years, sometimes decades awaiting execution, were put to death in the early months of 2026, spanning late January through February. We'll examine the crimes they committed, the victims they left behind, the legal processes that led to their sentences, as well as their final meals and the last words they spoke before death. Number 1. Charles Victor Thompson. After spending nearly 3 decades on death row, Charles Victor Thompson was executed on January 28, 2026, at 6 p.m. at the Huntsville unit in Texas. His execution brought an end to a case that began years earlier with a violent crime, a rare and historic prison escape, and a legal battle that stretched across decades. The story begins in Houston, Texas, in 1997, when Thompson, then 27 years old and already involved in drugs and criminal activity, crossed paths with a woman named Glenda Dennis Hayslip. Charles Victor Thompson was born on June 13, 1970, in Harris County, Texas, as a white male, 6 feet tall and weighing around 216 pounds. He completed his education only up to the 10th grade and had no prior prison record before his capital offense. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, details of his childhood and family remained sparse, though he later maintained contact with his father during the aftermath of his crimes. By the 1980s and 1990s, Thompson held various jobs in the Houston area, including roles in heating and air conditioning installation, electronics, pest control as an exterminator, and general labor. Around 1997, Thompson began a romantic relationship with Glenda Denise Hayslip, a 39-year-old white woman and a mother of 13 years old Wade Hayslip, living in an apartment in the Houston suburb of Tomball, Harris County, Texas. Denise Hayslip was a nail technician who owned her own nail salon, and was divorced in 1996 when Wade was just 11 years old. Their relationship was described by neighbors as off and on due to the constant issues and beating that occurred, lasting about a year, during which Thompson became well acquainted with Hayslip's residence. By April 1998, Hayslip met Darren Keith Kane, a 30-year-old bartender, at a local bar she frequented with Thompson. On the evening of April 29, 1998, Denise told Thompson she wanted to be with Darren, which he accepted, and they had a drink that evening at Denise's apartment. While they were having the drink, an argument erupted which led into a fight between the two men. Hayslip called the police, and when they arrived, they escorted Thompson outside her premises around 3 a.m. Thompson, still angry, returned 3 hours later in the early morning of April 30th, armed with a firearm. This incident underscored the ongoing disagreement rooted in Thompson's inability to accept the end of his relationship with Hayslip and his envy of her new partner. Thompson gained entry to the residence by kicking in the front door, at which point he confronted Kane and Hayslip. Thompson fired 4 rounds into Kane's neck and chest, resulting in immediate fatal trauma. Following the incapacitation of Kane, Thompson focused his attention on Hayslip. After reloading the weapon, he reportedly uttered a disparaging remark, "I can shoot you too, bitch," before discharging a round into her face. The projectile entered through her cheek, causing catastrophic internal damage, including extensive brain damage from oxygen deprivation and the near-total severance of her tongue. Despite these severe injuries, Hayslip survived the initial shooting but was critically wounded and airlifted via life flight helicopter to a hospital for emergency surgery. Thompson fled the scene, disposing of the murder weapon in nearby Cypress Creek, and confessed the details to a confidant, Diane Zernia, who he went to get a nap at his house. Later that morning, he contacted his father, who arranged his surrender to authorities, stating in his own words that he wanted to make himself available for questioning. On May 7, 1998, Hayslip, who had remained comatose on life support due to complications from the gunshot wound including tongue swelling, risk of bleeding out or drowning in blood, and interventions like a nasotracheal tube, was removed from life support by her family request, died as a result of the injuries inflicted by Thompson. The medical examiner and prosecution maintained that the gunshot was the primary cause of death, countering defense claims of medical negligence or intervening causes. During his pretrial detention in Harris County Jail from 1998 to 1999, Thompson attempted to eliminate witnesses by soliciting murders. He approached inmates Reed and Humphrey to kill Diane Zernia, the key witness linking him to the crimes. Reed and Humphrey confessed about it, but the police wouldn't believe it until they contacted Gray Johnson, who posed himself as a hired hitman, and in a wired meeting with investigator Gary Johnson posing as a hitman. Thompson offered $1,500 to retrieve the weapon and kill Zernia, providing a hand-drawn map of her address, family details, and vehicle descriptions. In August 1998, he also solicited informant Robin Rhodes to murder a hit list of witnesses, including Zernia, or to persuade them not to testify. He was doing all of these to make sure none of the witnesses testified against him. In April 1999, Thompson faced trial in Harris County on capital murder charges. During the guilt phase, debates centered on Hayslip's cause of death under Texas Penal Code Section 6.04, with prosecution testimony from medical examiner Paul Schroed, and the attending doctor establishing the gunshot as the primary cause, while defense expert Pat Radelat conceded she probably would have died without intervention. In the punishment phase, evidence of the solicited murders was introduced to prove future dangerousness. On April 14, 1999, the jury convicted the then 28-year-old Thompson of capital murder and sentenced him to death. On October 24, 2001, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reversed the death sentence on direct appeal due to a Sixth Amendment violation from improper evidence in the punishment phase. The court withdrew a granted rehearing on guilt phase issues on April 9, 2003. From 2004 to 2005, a retrial focused solely on the punishment phase, excluding the Gary Johnson evidence. Prosecutor Vic Wisner portrayed the killings as motivated by revenge, with Rhodes testifying about the solicitation. Defense attorney Terry Geiser argued it was a crime of passion and questioned Rhodes' credibility, noting his history as an informant in over 50 cases. On October 28, 2005, a new jury again sentenced Thompson to death. Just days later, from November 3 to 6, 2005, while held in Harris County Jail awaiting transfer to the Polunsky Unit, Thompson executed the most shocking prison escapes ever carried out by a death row inmate in the state. He smuggled a handcuff key, a fake ID badge claiming to be a state investigator from the Attorney General's office, and civilian clothes including khaki pants, a dark blue shirt, and white tennis shoes into his cell via a legal binder.
Really all I needed was the ID to facilitate it, and the handcuff key, which I did obtain down there, not here.
During a purported attorney meeting on November 3, 2005, once alone, he slipped out of his handcuffs and changed out of his orange prison jumpsuit and into the smuggled civilian attire.
Start thinking about it. The day you're sentenced to death, it's on your mind regularly, man, I'd like to get out of here.
Thompson then walked toward the exit, flashing his fake ID badge which claimed he was a state investigator with the Attorney General's office to at least 4 jail employees.
Don't run, walk. And when I walked out the steps and turned to walk behind vehicles, I looked over my shoulder. I was expecting like a squad, a goon squad or something to come running out and tackle me. I couldn't believe it either. I was just amazed. I was like, wow, I can't believe I did it.
He bluffed his way past the final guards at the front door by walking calmly. Nothing suspicious was noticed by any of the guards. He boarded a freight train to East Texas, staying in an open boxcar which he later described as an adventure where he felt dirty and happy, before reaching Shreveport, Louisiana. There, he stole a bicycle and posed as a Hurricane Katrina evacuee to obtain money from Good Samaritans. He then started making calls across to his friends in Canada planning to wire funds to him for a planned trip to Canada. He was captured on November 6, 2005, intoxicated at a payphone outside a liquor store in Shreveport following a 3-day manhunt.
I don't wish those people any harm. There's nothing I can say that's going to make them feel better, and they probably won't even be receptive to whatever I have to say. I mean, I deeply regret what I did. I live with it every day.
Thompson waived extradition and was returned to Texas. The escape highlighted jail negligence, resulting in 1 employee being fired and 7 disciplined. Notably, Thompson became the only U.S. death row inmate to escape a facility in the 21st century. Thompson later claimed that a sergeant had found a previous set of smuggled clothes but had merely confiscated them as contraband without reporting the incident to the district attorney's office. On October 31, 2007, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the second death sentence on direct appeal. The U.S. Supreme Court denied certiorari on October 6, 2008. Between 2008 and 2025, Thompson's case gained media attention. His story appeared in the 2008 biography The Grass Beneath His Feet. The Charles Victor Thompson story by Roger Rodriguez, which focused on the escape but omitted details about the handcuff key source. He was featured in so many movies and channels, where he discussed the murders and his experiences on death row. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied his first state habeas corpus application on April 17, 2013, and his second on March 9, 2016. The U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Texas denied his federal habeas petition on March 23, 2017. From February 18, 2019, to May 7, 2020, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals granted a certificate of appealability on a specific claim, heard the appeal, affirmed the denial on October 29, 2019, and denied rehearing on May 7, 2020. The U.S. Supreme Court denied certiorari on the federal habeas appeal on March 22, 2021. On September 11, 2025, Harris County prosecutors secured a death warrant, scheduling Thompson's execution by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit for January 28, 2026. In an October 2025 interview, Thompson expressed his intent to continue fighting his case but acknowledged that a stay was unlikely due to his escape attempt. On January 27 and 28, 2026, 55-year-old Thompson requested a stay from the U.S. Supreme Court, which was denied. His last meal consisted of breakfast items like scrambled eggs, grape jelly, oatmeal, applesauce, and biscuits, followed by lunch of fried chicken, pinto beans, sweet potatoes, carrots, sliced bread, swirl pudding, punch, and water. At approximately 6:50 p.m. on January 28, 2026, Thompson was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas, and pronounced dead. He became the first person executed in the U.S. in 2026 and Texas's first of the year. Witnesses included relatives of the victims, such as Kane's father. Thompson's final words were, "I hope the victim's family, their extended family, and their loved ones can find forgiveness in their heart, and that you can begin to heal and move past this. There are no winners here. It creates more trauma and more victims after 28 years." The execution took place nearly 28 years after the murders, following about 26 years on death row. Thompson was pronounced dead at 6:50 p.m. Central Time after lethal injection. Number 2. Ronald Palmer Heath. State, Florida. Ronald Palmer Heath was born on July 6, 1961, in the Jacksonville, Florida area. Little is publicly documented about his early childhood, but records indicate he grew up in a family environment that included his mother, with whom he maintained a close emotional bond throughout his life even till his death, often supporting her as she aged and lived alone. He also had a younger brother, Kenneth Heath, who would later become his co-defendant in a capital crime. Heath's life took a tragic and violent turn during his teenage years, marking the beginning of a pattern of criminal behavior that spanned decades. At the age of 16, on December 17, 1977, Heath committed his first known murder in Jacksonville, Duval County, Florida. The victim was 18-year-old Michael Green, someone Heath had only met that day. They hung out for hours, seeming like new friends, but the real reason for the attack remains murky to this day. According to Heath's confession to the police, Green made unwanted sexual advances toward him, prompting Heath to attack. He stabbed Green 23 times, but those wounds weren't immediately deadly. Rather than getting help or running away, Heath loaded the bleeding teen into his car and drove around Jacksonville's streets for over an hour, as if paralyzed by his own actions. Finally, he stopped, dragged Green out, and stabbed him again repeatedly. In a desperate attempt to cover it up, Heath tried to burn the car with Green still in it, but the victim escaped the fire. Undeterred, Heath chased him down, delivered more stabs, and in a chilling finale, bludgeoned him to death using a heavy tree branch. Dragged him back to the car, he then went ahead to set Green's car on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. The extreme violence from such a young perpetrator stunned everyone in the courtroom. Heath entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder and was only 16 but received a 30-year prison sentence in 1978. As a juvenile offender placed in adult facilities, Heath endured severe trauma during his incarceration. He was subjected to repeated violence, including multiple sexual assault and other involving gang assaults, which left him deeply scarred and affected his psychological development. These experiences occurred during his critical adolescent years, contributing to long-term emotional and mental health issues. Despite the 30-year sentence, Heath was paroled after serving approximately 10 years and was released in 1988, a choice that would prove deadly down the line. Ronald Heath, then 28-year-old, had barely tasted freedom for 6 months before striking again. In May, Ronald, alongside his 24-year-old brother, Kenneth Heath, the both who had a history of legal troubles, left Jacksonville and headed to Gainesville, where they frequented the Purple Porpoise Lounge, a local dive bar where Ronald had friends working as bartenders. On May 24, 1989, the second night they were there, they met 30-year-old Michael Sheridan, a traveling salesman from Atlanta on a business trip. Sheridan, who was grabbing dinner and drinks at the bar when he met Ronald and Kenneth. He was sociable and struck up a conversation with the brothers, even bought them drinks, and asked if they had marijuana or wanted to smoke. For Ronald, that was all it took. He whispered to Kenneth about luring Sheridan to a remote spot to rob him, and his brother nodded in agreement. The trio left in Kenneth's car, with Ronald behind the wheel, heading to a secluded wooded area in Alachua County south of Gainesville under the pretense of smoking marijuana together. Once there, they stepped out and casually smoked marijuana for a bit, everything seeming relaxed. Until Ronald gave the signal, a finger gun gesture asking if Kenneth had the weapon. Kenneth pulled a handgun on Sheridan, demanding his wallet, gold jewelry, and possessions. When Sheridan resisted and refused to comply, Kenneth was ordered by Ronald to shoot Sheridan once in the chest. Sheridan fell to the ground, writhing in agony, desperately trying to hand over his belongings. As Sheridan began emptying his pockets, Ronald kicked him repeatedly and demanded his bracelet. When Sheridan couldn't produce it quickly enough, Ronald grew impatient. He approached the dying man, kicked him while he was down, and pulled out a hunting knife. Stabbed him on the neck, then tried to slash Sheridan's throat, but the blade was too blunt to finish it. Ronald then ordered Kenneth to finish the job, and Kenneth shot Sheridan twice in the head. The brothers dumped Sheridan's body in the woods, wiped the knife clean, returned to the bar to steal items from his rental car, and set the car on fire with the knife inside to eliminate evidence. They used Sheridan's credit cards the next day to make purchases at the Oaks Mall in Gainesville, forging receipts with Kenneth's signature. Sheridan's decomposed body was discovered on May 30, 1989, already in an advanced stage of decomposition. The autopsy revealed death occurred 3 to 10 days prior, caused by 3 gunshots and a severe neck stab wound. Just 2 days later, on May 26, 1989, Heath committed another first-degree murder. The shooting death of 25-year-old Anthony Hammett during a robbery in the Jacksonville area. They persuaded him to leave with them, but Anthony declined when he realized they wanted to rob him. He was shot once in the back and left for dead. Ronald Heath faced charges for Hammett's murder, but they were dropped when Kenneth refused to testify, citing death threats. This left the case unresolved and the Hammett family denied closure. Several weeks after the Sheridan murder, a rookie error by the brothers cracked the case wide open. They tried using one of Sheridan's stolen credit cards for a car stereo purchase, but it was declined, flagging authorities. From there, the Gainesville Police Department and Alachua County Sheriff's Office traced card activity at Oaks Mall, piecing together the killer's post-murder path. Weeks later, Ronald was arrested at his trailer home in Douglas, Georgia, where he lived with his girlfriend. Police recovered clothing bought with the cards and Sheridan's watch during the search. Kenneth was also arrested and charged. In 1990, he stood trial in Alachua County for the Sheridan murder. Key evidence included Kenneth's testimony against his brother as part of a plea deal. Kenneth admitted to firing the shots but claimed he did so under Ronald's direction and prompting. In exchange, Kenneth pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. But no records show if he's been freed. The jury also heard about Heath's prior 1977 murder conviction and the recent Hammett indictment to establish his dangerousness. Heath was convicted of first-degree murder, armed robbery with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit forgery, 7 counts of forgery, and 7 counts of uttering a forgery. The jury recommended the death penalty by a 10-2 vote, and the judge imposed a death sentence, originally for execution in the electric chair, later changed to lethal injection as the new execution method. Heath was 28 at the time of sentencing. Ronald Heath languished on death row for over 35 years, with his lawyers launching numerous appeals to reverse the verdict, challenging the reliability of Kenneth's testimony. The sentencing disparity between the brothers, the non-unanimous jury recommendation, Florida's death penalty protocols, the secretive clemency process, and the impact of his juvenile incarceration on his brain development and maturity. But every one of his appeals was shot down, including the last by the Florida Supreme Court in January 2026. Finally, on January 9, 2026, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed Heath's death warrant, scheduling the execution for February 10, 2026, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time at Florida State Prison near Stark in Bradford County, making it the state's first execution of the year, following a record 19 executions in 2025. Heath, age 64, declined a special final meal, opting instead for the standard prison trays served to all inmates that day. He woke at 5:07 a.m., met with his mother and a friend, but declined a spiritual advisor visit. The execution used lethal injection via a 3-drug cocktail at Florida State Prison. At 5:50 p.m., Heath entered the chamber. 4 lines were set by 6 p.m., and before the drugs were administered, the warden asked if he had any last words. Heath looked up and said, "I'm sorry. That's all I can say. Thank you." The drugs began flowing shortly after. Heath closed his eyes, his breathing slowed, and he showed minimal physical reaction. A medic was summoned about 8 minutes in to check vital signs, and Heath was pronounced dead at 6:12 p.m. This marked the 48th U.S. execution of 2026 up to that point, with Florida leading in prior years. No complications were reported, and the process was described as routine by state officials. Witnesses included Michael Sheridan's siblings, Thomas and Nancy Sheridan, who hailed from upstate New York. They'd advocated tirelessly for decades, writing letters and calling the governor's office, to ensure this day came. This wraps up the chilling tale of Ronald Palmer Heath, executed for murdering Michael Sheridan. Number 3. Kendrick Simpson. State, Oklahoma. Kendrick Antonio Simpson was born around 1981 in New Orleans, Louisiana, specifically in the violent Lower Ninth Ward neighborhood. Little is publicly documented about his early childhood, but records indicate he grew up in a chaotic family environment in a housing project plagued by prostitution, drugs, and murders, including his mother, who was just 16 when he gave birth to him and later became addicted to crack cocaine, while his father abandoned him at birth. His earliest memories included witnessing dead bodies, shootings, stabbings, and other acts of extreme violence in the projects. He also had a traumatic experience of being sexually abused by a family member from age 11 until he was 16. Simpson's life took a tragic and violent turn during his teenage years, marking the beginning of a pattern of criminal behavior that spanned decades. At 16, he fathered 2 sons and committed his first major crime, a home invasion robbery in New Orleans where he beat and shot electronics repair business owner Hung Pham in the face, leaving him severely injured. Despite his youth, he was tried as an adult, convicted of armed robbery in 1997, and sentenced to 6 years in prison. As a young offender in adult-like facilities, Simpson endured severe trauma during his incarceration, including the harsh realities of prison life that compounded his existing psychological issues. These experiences occurred during his critical adolescent years, contributing to long-term emotional and mental health issues, including a later diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, from chronic childhood trauma, abuse, and violence. Despite the sentence, Simpson was released after serving his 6 years, in 2003, but his freedom was short-lived before more violence struck. In November 2004, while walking to a store in New Orleans, Simpson was the victim of a drive-by shooting, sustaining 5 bullet wounds to his leg, chest, abdomen, and skull. He underwent 16 surgeries and temporarily used a colostomy bag during recovery. This incident, combined with his childhood traumas, contributed to a diagnosis of severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, leaving him hypervigilant, paranoid, and in a fragile mental state. While still recovering from these injuries, Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans in August 2005, forcing Simpson to evacuate as a refugee to Oklahoma City, where he relocated and attempted to start over, but his PTSD and unresolved trauma persisted. Kendrick Simpson, then in his mid-20s, had been in Oklahoma City for only a few months before striking again with deadly force. On January 15, 2006, Simpson loaded an assault rifle, which he referred to as his chopper, into the trunk of a friend's car before heading out for the night. He and his friends first attended a house party where they consumed alcohol and marijuana before heading to Fritzy's hip-hop club in Oklahoma City. Inside the club, Simpson passed by 3 men best friends Glenn Palmer, 20, Anthony Jones, 19, and London Johnson, who made a casual comment about his Chicago Cubs baseball cap. Simpson took offense and stewed over it, later returning to confront them and threatening to chop them up, a slang reference to shooting them with his rifle. He walked away briefly but came back again, extending his hand to Palmer in a gesture of peace, saying, "We cool," at which point Palmer punched Simpson in the mouth, knocking him to the floor. Humiliated, Simpson and his friends left the club and stopped at a 7-Eleven gas station at Northwest 23rd Street and Portland Avenue. Coincidentally, Palmer, Jones, and Johnson arrived at the same gas station in Palmer's car. Simpson, believing the men had followed him with intent to kill, directed one friend to follow the victim's car and the other to retrieve his gun from the trunk. They tailed the victims for over 3 miles, eventually pulling alongside on Pennsylvania Avenue. As Simpson's car pulled alongside Palmer's, he immediately opened fire, spraying approximately 20 to 25 rounds into the vehicle. Palmer was hit in the chest, shoulder, and back. He remained conscious briefly, speaking to Johnson and expressing fear that the shooters would return, before succumbing to blood loss. Jones was struck in the head and torso, dying nearly immediately and remaining unconscious. Johnson, in the back seat, survived by crouching down and hiding during the barrage. After the shooting, Simpson boasted, "I'm a monster. I just shot the car up. They shouldn't play with me like that." The group drove to Midwest City, disposed of the rifle, which was never recovered, switched cars, and met up with some women. The motive was rooted in retaliation from the club altercation, escalated by Simpson's perceived fear for his life and his unresolved trauma, leading him to hunt down and execute the unarmed men in a ruthless drive-by shooting. Simpson was arrested shortly after the incident. His accomplices, Dalton and Robertson, were initially charged with the murders but pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact in exchange for 20-year prison terms. They testified against him at the trial, which took place in 2007 in an Oklahoma County courtroom in Oklahoma. Key evidence included their corroborated testimonies, Johnson's survivor account of the altercation and shooting, witnesses from the club and gas station, crime scene photos, victim wound documentation, ballistic evidence from the approximately 24 rounds fired, and a firearms demonstration to illustrate the semi-automatic rifle's function, since the weapon wasn't found. Simpson admitted to being at the club and in the fight but denied the shooting. However, letters he wrote to a jailmate contained admissions, and Collins testified to Simpson's confessions and lack of remorse. The jury also heard about Simpson's prior criminal history, including the 1990s home invasion and shooting in New Orleans, to establish his pattern of violence and dangerousness. On the defense side, his attorneys attempted to present mitigating factors like his traumatic upbringing, but they were criticized later for not fully exploring his PTSD and mental health issues. Simpson was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 10 years for firearm possession. Simpson was 26 at the time of sentencing. Kendrick Simpson languished on death row for nearly 20 years, with his lawyers launching numerous appeals to reverse the verdict, challenging the effectiveness of his trial counsel for failing to adequately present evidence of his severe childhood trauma, abuse, unstable household with addiction and violence, PTSD from being shot in 2004 and Hurricane Katrina displacement, and brain development impacts from his juvenile experiences. They also argued that the crime did not qualify as the worst of the worst, warranting death. Instead, they requested life without parole, noting he would die in prison anyway. On January 14, 2026, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board held a clemency hearing. Simpson spoke, apologizing to the victims' families and Johnson.
"I'm not the worst of the worst. I'm not a monster.
I'm ashamed of my actions. I'm ashamed of the destruction my actions caused. I'm ashamed of being a murderer. I've dedicated myself to nonviolence while traveling the road of redemption. I'm not the worst of the worst. I'm not a monster. I don't make any excuses. I don't blame others, and they didn't deserve what happened to them.
I was young and traumatized, ignorant to what was important in life, and compelled by paranoia."
He attributed his actions to being young and traumatized, ignorant to what was important in life, and compelled by paranoia. His attorneys highlighted his rehabilitation, obtaining his GED, becoming a devoted father to his 2 sons, and publishing poetry in the Rose State Literary Journal, including pieces criticizing the death penalty as state-sanctioned hypocrisy. Prosecutors opposed, calling Simpson a ruthless and violent killer who hunted victims, boasted, and showed no remorse, noting he smirked in court. The victims' families and survivor Johnson testified against clemency. Talisha Jones, Anthony's sister, said, "When Kendrick Simpson took my brother's life, he took all our lives. But every one of his appeals was shot down, including a final one by the U.S. Supreme Court on February 11, 2026, which rejected it without comment. Finally, on February 12, 2026, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt allowed the execution to proceed without granting a reprieve, making it the state's first execution of the year, following a record number in previous years. Simpson, aged 45, requested a classic fast food feast as his final meal: a bacon cheeseburger, large onion rings, and a strawberry milkshake. He woke early that morning but declined additional details on routine. He met with his spiritual advisor, Reverend Don Heath, but no other visitors are noted. The execution proceeded on February 12, 2026, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary via a 3-drug lethal injection protocol. At around 10:07 a.m., Reverend Don Heath began reading scripture from the Bible in the chamber. Simpson entered the chamber, was strapped to the gurney, and before the drugs were administered, the warden asked if he had any last words. Simpson looked up, smiled, gave a thumbs up to his supporters, and said, "I love y'all. Thank y'all for being here to support me. That's it," with no mention of the victims. The drugs began flowing shortly after. Simpson snored at 10:12 a.m., showed minimal physical reaction with 2 tears falling from his left eye over teardrop tattoos, and a doctor declared him unconscious about 5 minutes in. A medic was summoned about 8 to 12 minutes in to check vital signs, and Simpson was pronounced dead at 10:19 a.m. Central Time. No complications were reported, and the process was described as routine by state officials. The witnesses are Simpson's family members, the victims' relatives, including Glenn Palmer's sister Crystal Allison, witnessed and expressed disappointment over no final apology, noting his smile reminded them of the one that tormented them for 20 years.
I'm still just hurt and tormented by this. I was tormented again today. Even on his deathbed, he still smiled. So there's no remorse about this. So I feel good about the situation. I thank y'all for y'all's decision.
But they felt justice was definitely served for Palmer and Jones, whose young lives were taken tragically and far too soon. For them, that day marked the end of a wait that had lasted nearly 2 decades. They also thanked the state of Oklahoma for bringing closure to their families. This was Oklahoma's 130th execution since resuming in 1990. This wraps up the chilling tale of Kendrick Antonio Simpson, executed for murdering Glenn Palmer and Anthony Jones. Number 4. Melvin Trotter. State, Florida. Melvin Trotter was born in 1961 in Manatee County, Florida, as the product of a sexual assault, which profoundly shaped his early years. He grew up fatherless, with his biological father absent from his life, and endured severe emotional deprivation and physical abuse from his alcoholic mother, who struggled to cope with the circumstances of his conception. Trotter was one of 11 siblings. His family perceived him as slow from a young age, and he experienced developmental delays in speech, academic learning, and adaptive skills. His earliest memories were steeped in emotional deprivation and physical abuse from his birth mother, leading to him being placed into foster care at age 9. Unfortunately, his foster father was later imprisoned for aggravated battery, leaving Trotter to be raised solely by his foster mother in what he later described as an abusive and unhealthy setting, marked by violence, physical neglect, and further abuse. Trotter's only close familial bond was with one sister, who he loved deeply and shared moments with, but she was tragically killed when he was a teenager, further compounding his emotional trauma. School records from his early teens highlight his intellectual struggles, with grades in regular classes plummeting to DS and FS, underscoring his cognitive limitations. His teacher testified that Trotter was cooperative but made no academic progress, absorbed material poorly, and was a borderline retardate who benefited from adaptive skill training like handling money and telling time. A psychologist evaluation at age 15 in 1976 diagnosed him with an inadequate personality. Trotter's life took a tragic and violent turn during his teenage and early adult years, marking the beginning of a pattern of criminal behavior that spanned decades, fueled by untreated pain, intellectual impairments, and a desperate turn to drugs. At about 19 years old, in 1979, Trotter committed his first known major crime, a burglary in another state, likely driven by his unstable life and need for quick cash. What transpired was a calculated break-in. Trotter targeted a property, slipping in at night to steal valuables. The intrusion escalated when he was discovered, but he managed to flee initially. However, his lack of planning stemming from his impaired common sense and inability to foresee consequences left traces that led authorities straight to him. Police caught him through basic investigative work and witness tips, leading to his arrest shortly after. He was convicted of burglary and, as a young offender, received a relatively light 6-month prison sentence. But it marked his first taste of the system. Despite the sentence, Trotter was released after serving his 6 months. But his freedom was short-lived before violence struck again, pulling him deeper into a cycle of crime. In 1985, at around age 25, Trotter committed another escalating offense. A burglary of an occupied dwelling that turned into a robbery with a deadly weapon, resulting in 2 concurrent 2.5-year sentences. The crime unfolded on January 13, 1985, in Manatee County, Florida. Trotter and an accomplice targeted a home, breaking in while the victim was awake. What started as a burglary for money quickly turned violent. Trotter pinned the terrified victim down, restraining him physically to prevent escape or resistance, while his accomplice ransacked the room, tearing through drawers and belongings in a frantic search for cash and valuables. They overpowered and threatened the victim with a knife, heightening the fear and danger. The victim survived, though traumatized from the whole experience. Trotter's impulsive nature shone through again. He didn't cover his tracks well, and police caught him through victim identification combined with stolen items recovered nearby. He was arrested, convicted of burglary of an occupied dwelling and robbery with a deadly weapon, and sentenced on June 11, 1985. But shockingly, by the time of his next crime, he was out on house arrest or community control for this very offense, a lenient measure that allowed him to roam free and strike again. This time around it was deadly. Melvin Trotter, then 26 years old, struck again with force, this time, in a robbery that spiraled into unimaginable brutality. On June 16, 1986, in Palmetto, Manatee County, Florida, Trotter, high on rock cocaine and desperate for drug money, waited outside Langford's grocery store. A small corner shop owned by 70-year-old Virgie Langford, a beloved mother of 4 who had run the business for 5 decades and was days away from retirement. He lurked until the last customer left, then slipped inside under the pretense of buying but directly targeting the register for some cash. What transpired next was a nightmare. Trotter rifled through the cash register, grabbing about $100 in cash and food stamps, his hands shaking from the high. Langford was in the backyard, innocently cutting meat with a butcher knife when she heard noises from her store. When she came in to know what was happening inside, she saw Trotter with some cash and food stamps. Trotter immediately seized her knife in a frenzy and strangled her first, choking the life from her frail body to subdue her, then stabbed her 7 times, 6 in the right side and 1 in the left, including a large abdominal wound that left her intestines exposed and blood pooling on the floor. He held her down during the attack, making it especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel in the eyes of the court. The violence was fast, unnecessary, and excessive. As no other person was inside the store at the moment, a few witnesses outside saw when Trotter left but never heard any suspicious shout or sound from the store. So no one went to check, but Langford, remarkably, clung to life long enough until a truck driver who entered her store to buy some stuffs saw her almost dying, but she was able to describe who her attacker was: a black man in his 20s, wearing a Tropicana badge shirt, before being rushed to the hospital. She underwent emergency surgery but succumbed to cardiac arrest hours later. Her family left devastated, blaming not just Trotter but the bureaucratic do-gooders who allowed him freedom on house arrest. Trotter fled the scene, callously using the stolen money to buy more rock cocaine, showing no immediate remorse as he fed his addiction. The motive was pure robbery, escalated by his drug-fueled paranoia, perceived threats, and unresolved trauma, turning a theft into the execution of an unarmed elderly woman. Just 4 days later, on June 20, 1986, Trotter was indicted and arrested after he was being traced with Langford's dying description of her attacker perfectly, matching Trotter. A witness spotted him loitering nearby before the crime. He was traced to Tropicana Company, who gave details about his employment, which helped trace him to the place he was living then. During the search, police found the Tropicana badge t-shirt, which was recovered with blood stains that matched that of Langford, and a handprint at the scene sealed the forensic match. Police pieced it together with witness statements. Trotter first denied it but later claimed no premeditation since he arrived unarmed. But his impaired judgment from cocaine and intellectual disabilities fueled the rage. Melvin Trotter's trial took place in 1987 in the 12th Judicial Circuit, Manatee County Circuit Court in Florida. In April 1987, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and robbery with a deadly weapon. During the penalty phase, the jury recommended death by a non-unanimous 9-3 vote on May 18, 1987. The judge imposed the death sentence for murder and a concurrent 12-year term for robbery, which was later adjusted to 17 years. Aggravating factors included Trotter's prior criminal history, the 1979 burglary and 1985 robbery with a deadly weapon, establishing his escalating pattern of violence and dangerousness. On the defense side, his attorneys fought back, presenting mitigating factors like his traumatic upbringing, intellectual disability, below-average IQ, slow learner unable to plan, and cocaine intoxication impairing his control and judgment, pleading for life over death. He was resentenced after the Florida Supreme Court found some errors in handling aggravating factors in his former conviction, while reversing the sentence. In 1993, a new jury recommended death by an 11-1 vote, and the judge imposed the death sentence again for the murder of Virgie Langford, finding similar aggravators plus that it occurred while on community control, alongside mitigators like extreme mental and emotional disturbance and impaired capacity. It was affirmed by the Florida Supreme Court in 1996. Trotter was 26 at the time of the original sentencing. Melvin Trotter languished on death row for almost 40 years, where he reportedly showed remorse in letters and statements. His lawyers launched numerous appeals to reverse the verdict, challenging his intellectual disability factors and the law against executing intellectually disabled offenders. Evidence included childhood IQ scores of 69 to 70. The circuit court denied all on July 7, 2005, questioning expert reliability and finding insufficient evidence by clear and convincing standard. They also challenged the lethal injection protocols and the use of expired drugs in execution, incorrect dosages, unauthorized drugs, poor record keeping, leading to risks of conscious pain, and prolonged suffering, as seen in past botched executions like that of Angel Diaz's. But every one of his appeals was shot down, including over a dozen motions and petitions since 1996, 2 to the U.S. Supreme Court, both denied, federal habeas denials, and a final one by the U.S. Supreme Court on February 24, 2026, which rejected it without comment. Finally, on January 23, 2026, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed Trotter's death warrant, scheduling the execution for February 24, 2026, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time at Florida State Prison near Stark in Bradford County, making it the state's second execution of the year, following a record 19 executions in 2025. Trotter, age 66, requested a simple final meal: fish, cornbread, cake, and soda. He woke early that morning but declined additional details on routine. He met with family and spiritual advisors that day but had no noted visitors in the final hours. The execution used lethal injection via a 3-drug cocktail at Florida State Prison. At around 6 p.m., the process began in the chamber. Trotter entered the chamber, was strapped to the gurney, and before the drugs were administered, the warden asked if he had any last words. Trotter replied, No. The drugs began flowing shortly after. Trotter barely moved, showed minimal physical reaction, and was declared unconscious around 6:08 p.m. A medic was summoned about 8 to 12 minutes in to check vital signs, and Trotter was pronounced dead at 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time. This marked the fourth U.S. execution of 2026 up to that point, with Florida having a history of leading in prior years. No complications were reported, and the process was described as routine by state officials. Witnesses included independent journalists and Virgie Langford's family members, including her children who blamed Trotter and the system for their mother's death, and expressed disappointment over no apology or confession but a sense that justice was served. For them, that day marked the end of a wait that had lasted nearly 40 years, providing some measure of closure amid unimaginable pain. Florida Department of Corrections officials noted the execution proceeded without incident, while some advocates highlighted Trotter's rehabilitation in the prison and criticized the state for ignoring his intellectual disability and rushing executions. This wraps up the chilling tale of Melvin Trotter, executed for murdering Virgie Langford. Leave me in the comments what you think about these cases. Was justice served or not? Additionally, in the description, you'll find a compilation of all the executions carried out so far in 2026. Thanks once again, and hopefully I will see you on the next one.